person. And the second of the holidays, this Easter day, is about the birth of the Christ consciousness within the person, within Jesus. Okay? And so it's about that birthing of Christ consciousness. And Ernest Holmes talks about, in the reading that we had today, that the Christ knows that his individuality. Now Ernest was writing at a time where he used the masculine pronoun for everything, right? For everybody. So his doesn't mean a guy, and it isn't about Jesus personally. It's about all of us. Okay? So the Christ knows that his and her individuality is indestructible. That life is an eternal being, living forever and loving forever in the bosom of the Father, Mother, God. So that's who we are, and that's what we're doing. Breathe that in. You and I are eternal sons and daughters, living forever in the bosom of Father, Mother, infinite God. How's that? Yeah. So that's what we're cool. So that's what we celebrate today. So Ernest asked the question, who is the Christ? Who is Christ? And he answers that question with the mystical conception of Christ means, and these are Ernest's words, okay? Some people use just kind of normal small words. Now if we were Troward, we'd be really here for a long time, but this is Ernest. The mystical conception of Christ means the universality of sonship embodied in any individual who recognizes this sonship. Let's unpack that for a minute. What does that mean? The universality of son and daughtership. So we are universal, it is universal. All of us are sons and daughters of the Infinite One. Okay? Turn to your neighbor and say, you are a son or daughter, whichever one is appropriate, of the Infinite. Since I see Lori sitting by herself back there, Lori, you are a daughter of the Infinite. Yeah. Embodied in any individual who recognizes the son and daughtership. Now here's the clue. Here's the as they say, the challenging part. We have to recognize it and embody it. See, right now this room is filled with radio and television waves, right? We could be watching NCIS or a replay of the basketball games yesterday. All that's available to us right now, or people talking about the basketball games yesterday. We could be listening to that right now, but we would need to be, one, aware, that is, to have a receiver, right? To be able to receive the waves, and then we would, a tuner to receive the waves, and then we would need something to embody those sound waves, which would be a receiver and speakers, before we could ever capture them. So the infinite, the universal son and daughtership of us is always available. It's always broadcasting. Do we receive it? Do we tune into it? And do we embody it? Is the question. And that's the challenge that we look at today. He goes on to quote Meister Eckhart, who was a 14th century Christian mystic, who said, God never begat but one son, daughter. But the eternal is forever begetting the only begotten. See, that begetting process, that birthing process, is constantly happening. There's only one. Jesus was an individualization of that, just like each of us is an individualization of that. Take a breath. On one level, he was no different than you. Take a breath. Maybe a deep breath on that one. Okay? What he was and what he became was awake and aware more fully than anybody else we know of in the West. Okay? Guess what? So can you. So can I. That's the cool thing. When Zen Buddhism went to, I'm going to do a slide aside here, I think I'm going to babble. When Buddhism went to China and then Japan, there was an idea that you had to spin the wheel of Dharma for a long, long time and work off your karma and all that stuff. That was kind of out of the Hindu tradition. What Zen Buddhists brought was the idea that no, Enlightenment is available instantaneously, right now. They have words for it, and they have processes for it, and they have all sorts of different Zen masters who have written about their moment when they woke up. Okay? That is available to all of us right now. The resurrection consciousness is available to us right now. Because just as the birth, just as the begetting is constantly happening right now, guess what else is happening right now? The resurrection. Constantly happening moment by moment by moment by moment. Because the resurrection consciousness is waking up to our full awareness and embodiment of who we truly are. The magnificence of who we truly are. And that is, again, constantly happening. Do we tune in? Do we receive? But it's constantly happening. And it's available to us. It's available to us on large scale. It's available to us on small scale. And so whatever we want to play. So a story that we look at, and you guys know that I love these stories because not as literal truth, did it really happen or not, I don't care, but rather, what can we learn from it? What does it teach us? Okay? What is the soul story within it? So this story is just like last week when we looked at the Passover and Exodus story. It was a mind map of moving from bondage into freedom. This is the story of moving from, not from a place, or not to a place like the promised land, but rather to changing our state of consciousness from one of being stuck in the humanity consciousness to moving into Christ consciousness, to moving into the fullness of who we truly are, and to giving birth to that, to allowing that to happen. I'd like to call that the risen mind. See, there's three states of consciousness that we can be in as human beings. We can be unconscious. You know people like that. Nobody here, but you know people like that. Maybe occasionally you might be aware that you've spent a moment or two like that yourself this week. I have. And then we have the rising consciousness, that which begins to be aware and begins to wake up and begins to say, I'm more than just this. And a lot of us live in that consciousness. And then we have the risen consciousness, the already done risen mind consciousness. Now, here's the truth. You can't get to risen mind consciousness from rising in consciousness. You can't get there from here. We have to plant ourselves in the risen mind and say, this is the truth of who I am. Because guess what? Right now, right this second, it is the truth of who you are. There is that within you which is already living as and in the risen mind. Breathe. When we stop fooling around with unconscious and even rising in consciousness, and we move into that state where we declare and start to allow ourselves to become aware and live in that consciousness, our life shifts big time. Jesus invites us to follow him. I love it. Charles Fillmore says he invites us to follow him, but we don't. At least not all the way. Because all the way is a tough way to follow. And so we stay in the bondage, we stay in the human consciousness because it's familiar, it's comfortable, because we're afraid to leave it, okay? Because of our own error thinking, and because we don't see that. Because in order to have a resurrection, what do you have to have? Yeah. You got to have the death before the resurrection. You got to have a winter before the spring. Even here in California. We have to have some degree of winter. You know, we were out in the garden the other day, and I was looking at these plants that I remember looking at those and during the winter and thinking, now, were those annuals or were those perennials? Should I tear them out or not? You know, and guess what? Some of them these days are sprouting and vining and blossoming. New life is occurring. Resurrection is happening. So we live in this, we see this all around us. But most of us don't want to go through that little death experience, right? We want to go, can we go from the Last Supper, you know, the dinner party, to the resurrection without that part in between? Can we do that? And the answer is no, we can't. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. But the truth is, you already know this. Buddha had a death experience. a couple of them actually. He had to leave behind his comfortable home, the wealthy parents and the wealthy lifestyle that he grew up with, and let that die off and say, I'm leaving that. He also had to then move from when he was in that ascetic consciousness, when he'd been a wandering monk for 5 years and living on a grain of rice or a nut per day. He finally basically almost died, passed out in a river, and would have drowned if it wasn't that some young woman brought him and grabbed him and pulled him to shore and fed him. And when his fellow monks found out that he had been fed, he'd taken food, oh my God, they rejected him and they walked away and they said, you've sold out. You've given up. Okay? Kind of like the apostles, checking out on Jesus. Okay? So he had to have that death experience, and finally he sits down, and that, by the way, was where he finally said, neither extreme works, I'm taking the middle path. That was the founding of the middle path of Buddhism. And finally he says, I'm going to sit down under this banyan tree, under the Bodhi tree, and I'm not leaving until one of two things happens. Either I get the answer to the cause of human suffering, in other words, I get enlightenment, or I die. Okay? That's pretty extreme, right? That's pretty much, I'm going right up against it. And so this story that we look at today is the Jesus version of that same story. See, Jesus had to die to his humanity. He spent a lot of time in the Gospels. You read about him having conversation about the Son of Man and the Son of God, and he uses both of those. And sometimes it looks kind of confusing. The way to look at that is that when he's talking about Son of Man, he's talking about his human consciousness, his how he lives in the world consciousness. Now, he was a pretty darn good example of humanity, right? Okay? Pretty highly evolved. But it wasn't the Son of God consciousness. It wasn't the fully evolved, beyond all that stuff, consciousness. It was the consciousness that occasionally got ticked off with his disciples and his followers for just not getting it. There's a bunch of times, that he talks about that. I remember one of those is he basically kind of looks up and says, how long will I have to suffer these fools, my Father? Something to that effect. Okay? And he's talking about his own followers, by the way. Okay? It's basically, when are they going to get it? I've been talking this way, I've been talking this way, and teaching this way. They don't get it. He has all that stuff. He has the Gethsemane experience. The sitting in the garden the night before, sweating blood, and saying, if there's any way I can get out of this. That's the Father, take this cup from me. That's basically saying, is there another way? Can I get out of this? That's that consciousness. That's the human consciousness. That's the Son of Man consciousness. And we have to surrender to that in order to move into the God consciousness, the Christ consciousness, the Son of God consciousness. And of course, the reason we know of Jesus is he did. He walked through that path all the way. Take a breath. And so he moved into and was willing to step into that risen mind consciousness. In Son of Man consciousness, we know about Christ consciousness. We can know about it. Okay? But we don't necessarily live the whole thing. Jesus was working on that. He was growing in his ability to embody it. He raises Lazarus from the dead because he knows, and he says, this guy is asleep. He's not really dead, because he sees that in consciousness. Now, you and I, we can raise people from the dead. We can see people who are suffering, and we can see what their story, what their better life looks like, and we can know that for them, right? When we get stuck, it's harder to know our story. It's harder to know our greater good. That's where we go, and one of the things we recommend is lean into somebody else's faith. That's why we have prayer partners. That's why we have practitioners and ministers. That's why we have this whole spiritual community. Lean into somebody else's faith when you're struggling. And we all struggle at times. Okay? And so Jesus gets to the point where he knows that he can raise people from the dead, but he's still not ready yet to do it himself, by himself. That's a whole different kettle of fish, isn't it? There's nobody else there to save me. There's no Jesus to raise me from the dead in case I'm mistaken about this or in case I screw up. I'm self-dependent. And so he's working up to it, and he's working up to it. And he has to finally go through the complete surrender process. he begins to say things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, the real way, truth, and life is God, right? But he begins to embody it. Where I am God. I am the way. I am that truth. I am that life. And that's what each of us has to come to when we finally get where we say, I'm one with God, and no longer just, that's a nice thing, but I don't quite believe it. But where that's really the life that we are living. Breathe that in. Breathe that in. When we get that we are one with God. When we truly, 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 truly get that we are sons and daughters of an infinite. And all this stuff we looked at in the human level isn't important. That we say affects us, but we're beyond that in truth. There's an aspect of you that has never been hurt, abandoned, betrayed, that has never believed that it's not good enough, never done anything wrong, that knows that lives that. You know that part of you, right? You know that there is that part of you. Some of you? Okay? For those who don't know it, there is that part of you. There is that aspect of each of us that has never been hurt by any of this stuff. That's beyond our human level, that is our Christ mind, that is our Buddha mind, that is our risen mind, whatever name we give it. Breathe that in. Be willing today to touch that. Be willing today to have that experience, to have that revealed to you. In order for us to move from where we are to a greater good, we have to be willing to let go of where we are. One of my teachers used to say, don't let good be the enemy of better. Okay? No matter how good your life is, and for all of us, our life is good, right? You may say, yeah, but David, I've got this list of things going on in my life, right? Let me ask you this. When you're looking up at the grass instead of down at the grass, will that list matter? No. Okay? And so we all carry our list. But the question is, am I approaching life from my list of this is my problems? Or am I approaching my life from my life is good because I am God in form and I'm having fun with this adventure? Today is my 1-year anniversary of being here. I did my first talk a year ago. Easter Sunday a year ago. And on Facebook, I was noticing just this morning that a friend of mine, Reverend Patricia Campbell, noted that it was her 2-year anniversary. She moved from Temecula, Southern California, to Calgary, Alberta, Canada, at this time of year. Okay? From beautiful, sunny, and warm to snow. She said her sister who went with her hightailed it out of there as soon as she got, it's like she got a plane and got out of there right away, back to California. And she says she loved it, and one of the things she said was, it's not been boring. It's been hot, it's been cold, it's been up, it's been down, it's been successful, it's been not so successful, it's been all sorts of things, but it hasn't been boring. Who here wants a boring life? Your list is how it's not boring. Your list is how you're having fun overcoming stuff and challenges in your life. Okay? It's easier to look at the list and to live that and to overcome that when we recognize that we are the one infinite presence. Because then, instead of problems being this big, we're this big. Instead of us telling God how big our problems are, we're telling our problems how big our God is. So the surrender process may feel scary because we have to move out of comfort zones. We have to move out of business as usual, the same old, same old. We have to die to part of our ego, part of ourselves. But on the other side of that is this consciousness of a greater good. How many of you have walked through a dark night of the soul at some point in time in your life? Probably everybody can put their hand up for this, or at least nod their head. Okay? And what walked you through that was some inner knowledge that past this process is a better life. Past this process is something better. And so that's why you didn't set up camp and make a 4-star resort hotel in the valley of the shadow of death. You walked through the valley of the shadow of death, the dark night of the soul, and got to the other side. And that's why we're sitting here having this conversation instead of me doing your memorial service. And even then, you'd still be walking, by the way. I remember a comment that I heard years ago from a Zen master who talked about suicide, and he said, "Oh, interesting concept. Kill the body to quiet the mind." The mind keeps on going. The life keeps on going. We're eternal beings. Whenever I got into that consciousness, I said, it's like, I don't want to start over again. I've already gone, so far. I don't want to start over again. I'm going to keep on going on the one that I have. It may not be pretty, it may not be perfect, but it's a whole lot better than the consequences. So Jesus talks about the way, the Son of God consciousness. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He builds that up in his consciousness. That's what we do here. That's what we take classes. That's what we do processes together. That's what we come together and lean into each other's faith, is to start to wake up and remember who we truly are. Are you with me with that? Yeah. That's why we're here. If that's not why you're here, I'm not sure. The chocolate's good too. But we're here to wake up to the truth of who we truly are. And so today we're going to have a ritual process for that. Are you good with that? That's why you have the flowers. If anybody does not have a flower, would you put your hands up and one of the ushers will bring you a flower? You should have gotten one when you came in. Anybody missing a flower? Got Cheryl back there. So we're going to create a ritual to experience this process, because oftentimes ritual allows us to embody it and walk it. And this is one of the qualities we want to do, is embody it and walk it. So I'm going to, in a moment, invite up the ministers and practitioners. And we're going to line up here. And what I'm going to invite you to do in a moment is to go within and to ask yourself a couple of questions, and that is, where am I ready to move into a greater consciousness? Where am I ready for a resurrection? So, Judy, can we have a little music behind this for just a moment? And so I invite you to take a breath. And if you feel comfortable, gently close your eyes. Let yourself relax. Let all the concern about what came before, what's going to come after, fall away, and be present with just your breath in this moment. Taking another deep breath. Moving into that sacred aspect of yourself, that sacred part of your being. That which knows its oneness with Spirit. And allow it to reveal to you, where am I ready to move into a greater consciousness? Where am I ready to move into a greater consciousness? What is ready to awaken within me? Where in my life am I ready for a resurrection? Allow yourself to be aware of that. Breathe that in. If you're not quite clear, know that there is that within you which does know. And so just be willing that whatever that is, it will make itself known and reveal itself to you. Then we're going to ask this sacred part of ourselves one more question. And that is, what must die? What is it within me that's ready to die, to be released, to be let go of? In order to have this new growth, what needs to be cleared away? What is the stone that needs to be rolled away for my full freedom of consciousness? Now being aware of the flower that you're holding. Allow that flower to symbolize that which is to be released and let go of. Because like everything else, like all that to be released, the flower is beautiful. Because the life that we have, even the struggles we have, are beautiful. But they're also, like the flower, temporary. They're part of a mortal consciousness, not the immortal consciousness. And so allow that flower, in all of its beauty, in all of its temporariness, to represent that which you're willing to release. I'm going to invite up the ministers and practitioners. And so what we're going to do is have a blessing ceremony where the ministers and practitioners will bless you for what it is that is the new consciousness that you would like to move into, and where you can leave your flower to create the beauty of the releasing and allow that to be released. And so we're going to start first with Judy and then the choir, because they're going to provide us with some music afterwards as we're doing this process. And then the ushers will be inviting people from the back rows to come forward. And so you can choose whichever minister or practitioner you wish to work with and to be blessed by. And Michael, I'm going to ask you to make sure that my microphone is off during this. So if you'll come forward.
To love, serve.